Is your morning coffee making your diabetes worse? A 15-minute read. Let me start with something honest. If you have type 2 diabetes, or you are watching your blood sugar carefully, you have probably felt a quiet guilt every single morning when you reach for your coffee. You have read the headlines. Coffee spikes cortisol, coffee disrupts insulin, coffee raises blood sugar. You have heard vague warnings from doctors. You have seen the studies contradict each other, and eventually you just stopped trying to figure it out. I want to help you actually figure it out today. Because the relationship between coffee and diabetes is one of the most genuinely complicated stories in all of nutritional science. It is not a simple good or bad story. Coffee is a wildly complex botanical brew containing over 1,000 distinct chemical compounds, and its effects on your blood glucose are shaped by factors as specific as your genetics, the time of day you drink it, what you ate, how the coffee was prepared, and what you put inside the cup. By the end of this, you will have a serious, honest understanding of what the science actually says, not to scare you away from your morning ritual, not to offer false comfort either, just to give you enough real information to make a genuinely informed decision about your own cup. The paradox that has frustrated researchers for 20 years, let me show you the contradiction at the center of all of this. On one hand, large long-term studies that follow hundreds of thousands of people over many years have consistently found that habitual coffee drinkers have a significantly lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes in the first place. A major analysis published in Diabetologia pooled data from 28 studies covering more than 1 million participants. The conclusion was striking. Every additional cup of coffee per day was associated with roughly a 6% reduced risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And here is the interesting part. Decaf drinkers showed similar benefits. That fact points the finger away from caffeine and toward coffee's other compounds. So the long view looks good. Coffee protects against diabetes, but then you look at the controlled clinical studies, the ones where researchers actually measure blood glucose in real time, and the picture gets much more complicated. When you give caffeine to a person who already has type 2 diabetes and then feed them a standardized meal, their blood sugar spikes significantly higher than it would have without the caffeine. Multiple studies have replicated this finding. The mechanism involves caffeine blocking certain receptors in muscle tissue, which ultimately impairs how well those muscles respond to insulin. So here is the paradox. Coffee appears to help prevent diabetes from developing, but may make blood sugar control harder for people who already have it. How do we make sense of that? What caffeine actually does inside your body? To understand what is happening, we need to spend a few minutes on the biochemistry. I promise it is more interesting than it sounds. Caffeine is what scientists call an adenosine receptor antagonist. Adenosine is a molecule that builds up in your brain and body throughout the day, creating the sensation of fatigue. Caffeine works by sitting in adenosine's receptor slots and blocking the signal, which is why you feel more alert and awake after you drink it. That is the well-known story. What most people do not know is that adenosine receptors are not just in the brain. They are also in skeletal muscle tissue, the liver, and fat cells, where adenosine plays a quieter but important role in helping those cells respond to insulin. When caffeine blocks adenosine receptors in your muscle tissue, it disrupts the normal chain of events that allows insulin to do its job. The cells become temporarily less responsive to insulin's message to absorb glucose from the bloodstream. The result is that your blood sugar stays elevated longer after a meal. Studies have measured this effect with real precision. A dose of caffeine equivalent to 2 or 3 cups of coffee can raise post-meal blood glucose by roughly 20 to 30% in people with type 2 diabetes compared to the same meal without any caffeine. Now add to that a second mechanism. Caffeine also triggers the release of adrenaline and, to a lesser degree, cortisol. These are your body's primary stress hormones. Both of them directly signal your liver to release stored glucose into the bloodstream. This is the fight or flight energy response, an evolutionary survival mechanism. When something dangerous is chasing you, you need immediate fuel for your muscles. But when you are sitting at your kitchen table at 7 in the morning, that glucose has nowhere useful to go, and your blood sugar climbs. This second mechanism is particularly important in the morning because cortisol is already naturally elevated in the early hours of the day. Your body uses cortisol as a natural alarm clock. It begins rising around 3 or 4 in the morning and peaks shortly after you wake up. When you add caffeine on top of that cortisol peak, you are compounding an effect that can produce substantial blood sugar spikes in the first hour of the day before you have even eaten a bite of food. Many people with diabetes assume their morning blood sugar trouble is entirely what doctors call the dawn phenomenon, a natural early morning glucose rise. And it might partly be. But there is a real chance that their first cup of coffee, drunk on an empty stomach during peak cortisol hours, is significantly amplifying that effect in ways they have never connected. There is one more layer here, and it matters. The human body adapts to caffeine over time. Research suggests that habitual coffee drinkers develop a degree of tolerance, which may blunt some of the insulin sensitivity disruption. Some studies have found that the acute blood sugar raising effect of caffeine is actually stronger in occasional drinkers than in people who drink coffee every single day. This tolerance effect may be one reason why consistent coffee drinkers in large population studies seem to escape the worst of caffeine's metabolic disruption. If you are going to drink coffee at all, it may matter that you drink it consistently rather than sporadically. The heroes you never hear about caffeine gets all the attention, partly because it is the compound that produces the most immediately felt effects. But a cup of coffee contains a remarkable collection of other biologically active compounds, several of which appear to work in genuinely beneficial ways for metabolic health. The first and most important are chlorogenic acids. These are a family of polyphenol compounds, essentially plant-derived antioxidants, and they are present in very substantial quantities in coffee. In fact, coffee is one of the richest dietary sources of chlorogenic acids in the Western diet. For many people, it accounts for the majority of their total daily polyphenol intake. What do chlorogenic acids do? They inhibit an enzyme in the gut that regulates how quickly glucose is absorbed into the bloodstream after a meal. By slowing that absorption, chlorogenic acids act as a natural glucose buffer, smoothing out the peaks that would otherwise occur. They also appear to improve insulin sensitivity through a completely separate pathway, one involving a cellular energy sensor that, when activated, makes cells more responsive to insulin signals. Here is the critical detail. Chlorogenic acids are present in both caffeinated and decaffeinated coffee. Decaf removes roughly 97% of the caffeine but retains most of the chlorogenic acids. This is why decaf shows similar, and sometimes even superior, long-term metabolic benefits compared to regular coffee in research studies. The protective compound is not caffeine. Caffeine is actually working against that protection in the short term. The second hidden hero is magnesium. Coffee is a meaningful dietary source of magnesium, a mineral that plays an essential role in how your insulin receptors function. The insulin receptor is a protein on the surface of your cells. When insulin arrives and binds to it, a chain of events unfolds that allows glucose to enter the cell and be used for energy. Magnesium is required for that receptor to work properly. Deficiency in magnesium, which affects an estimated 40 to 50% of adults in Western countries, is directly associated with insulin resistance. Every cup of coffee provides a modest contribution of magnesium that accumulates meaningfully across daily consumption. There are also lesser-known compounds called trigonelline and quinides. Trigonelline, a niacin-related compound abundant in coffee, has shown the ability to reduce fasting blood glucose and improve insulin secretion in preliminary studies. Quinides, which form during the roasting process, appear to activate receptors in the gut in ways that modulate glucose metabolism. The science on these is less mature than it is for chlorogenic acids, but the picture emerging is of a brew far more pharmacologically interesting than most people realize. The variables that change everything. If you have been following this closely, you have already sensed the answer to the original question. Whether coffee is helping or hurting your blood sugar is entirely conditional. The following variables can swing your personal equation dramatically in either direction. The first and most significant variable is what you add to your cup. This is almost never discussed in the studies that headline the health news. The research showing coffee's protective effects is based on black coffee, or at most coffee, with modest amounts of plain milk. It is emphatically not based on a large sweetened latte with flavored syrup. A standard, large flavored latte from a popular coffee chain can contain 40 to 60 grams of sugar, more than a can of soda. Add to that the glucose-raising effect of caffeine, and you have created conditions for a dramatic blood sugar spike that has very little to do with coffee's underlying biochemistry and everything to do with what you put in it. Even seemingly modest additions compound significantly over time. 2 teaspoons of white sugar in your morning coffee equals roughly 8 grams of added sugar per cup. At 2 cups per day, that is 16 grams daily. Nearly 6,000 grams of added sugar per year consumed before you have eaten a single meal. This single habit can overwhelm any metabolic benefit the coffee's polyphenols might otherwise provide. The second variable is roast level. The roasting process dramatically changes coffee's chemistry. Chlorogenic acid content, those beneficial polyphenols we talked about, is significantly higher in lightly roasted coffee than in dark roasts. The high temperatures of dark roasting destroy substantial amounts of those compounds. By some estimates, a light roast retains up to 3 times the chlorogenic acid content of a dark roast. If you are drinking coffee partly for metabolic benefit, lighter roasts are meaningfully superior for that purpose. The third variable is preparation method. Not all coffee is chemically identical. Unfiltered coffee such as French press, mocha pot, Turkish coffee, or espresso without a paper filter contains lipid compounds called diterpenes. These compounds raise LDL cholesterol and have mixed effects on insulin secretion. Paper-filtered coffee removes the vast majority of these diterpenes, producing a cleaner cup for those managing both blood sugar and cardiovascular risk simultaneously. The fourth variable is timing. Drinking coffee on an empty stomach in the early morning, during peak cortisol hours, produces the most acute blood sugar disruption. Studies have shown that consuming coffee 30 to 60 minutes after a meal significantly blunts the glucose-raising effect, likely because food in the stomach slows digestion and stabilizes the glycemic environment. Some researchers now suggest that the most diabetes-friendly time to drink coffee may actually be mid-morning or early afternoon after breakfast, as cortisol begins its natural decline. The fifth variable is your individual genetics. Humans vary enormously in how quickly they metabolize caffeine, largely due to variations in a gene called CYP1A2. Fast metabolizers break down caffeine rapidly. Their acute blood glucose disruption from caffeine is relatively short-lived. Slow metabolizers keep caffeine circulating in their system for much longer, sometimes 6 hours or more, experiencing prolonged impairment of insulin sensitivity. Research has found that slow metabolizers not only experience greater blood sugar disruption from caffeine, but also a blunted version of coffee's long-term protective effects. Genetic testing for this variant is available and can provide genuinely meaningful guidance for personalized decisions. A tale of two people. Let me make all of this concrete with 2 hypothetical but scientifically plausible examples. Person A is a 52-year-old woman with well-controlled type 2 diabetes. She drinks 2 cups of medium roast filtered coffee per day, black, with breakfast. She is a fast caffeine metabolizer. For her, coffee is likely a net positive. The chlorogenic acids are improving her gut's glucose absorption profile. The magnesium is supporting her insulin receptor function. The caffeine's disruptive effects are metabolized quickly. Her blood glucose monitoring shows smooth, modest peaks after breakfast. Person B is a 48-year-old man with poorly controlled type 2 diabetes, not yet on medication. He wakes early, drinks 3 large cups of dark roast coffee with oat milk and 1 sugar, starting at 5:30 in the morning before breakfast. He is a slow caffeine metabolizer. The picture looks quite different for him. His coffee has relatively low chlorogenic acid content because it is dark roast. It contains added sugar and the moderate glycemic index of oat milk. He is drinking it during peak cortisol hours, before any food. His caffeine stays in his bloodstream for 6 or more hours, continuously impairing insulin sensitivity throughout the morning. He has significant blood sugar spikes that he attributes to his dawn phenomenon, not realizing his coffee is substantially amplifying them. Same category of drink, dramatically different metabolic consequences. What should you actually do? Here are 7 evidence-based principles. These are a framework for your own body, not a universal prescription. 1. Drink it black or close to it. Eliminating added sugars and sweetened creamers is the single highest impact change most people can make. If you genuinely cannot tolerate black coffee, small amounts of whole milk or unsweetened nut milk are far better options than flavored syrups, sweetened non-dairy milks, or sugar. A small amount of cinnamon adds flavor and actually modestly improves insulin sensitivity on its own. 2. Consider shifting to lighter roasts. Light to medium roasts retain substantially more chlorogenic acids than dark roasts. Specialty single-origin light roasts are a different drinking experience, more acidic and complex, but they are nutritionally superior for metabolic purposes. 3. Delay your first cup until after breakfast. Giving your cortisol peak time to begin declining before you introduce caffeine and having eaten something first can meaningfully reduce blood sugar disruption. A practical rule used by many diabetes-focused dietitians is to wait at least 30 to 60 minutes after waking and to have eaten first. 4. Monitor your personal response. If you use a continuous glucose monitor or test your blood sugar regularly, you have a powerful tool available to you. Test before coffee and 1 and 2 hours after, both with and without a meal, on different days. Real personal data from your own body is worth more than any population average statistic from a study. 5. Consider high-quality decaf. If your monitoring shows significant coffee-associated blood sugar spikes, decaf is not a consolation prize. It retains most of coffee's beneficial compounds while removing the primary driver of blood sugar disruption. Look for decaf processed via the Swiss water or CO2 method, which better preserves polyphenol content. 6. Cut the second and third cup. The benefits of chlorogenic acids are largely present in 1 or 2 cups. Beyond that, you are adding more caffeine without proportionally more benefit, while extending the duration of insulin sensitivity impairment throughout the morning. 7. Talk to your specific doctor about your specific medications. Some diabetes medications, particularly those in the sulfonylurea family, can interact with caffeine in ways that affect both efficacy and side effects. These general principles are a starting framework, not a replacement for individualized medical guidance. But I feel fine after my coffee. This is the most common response, and it deserves a serious answer rather than dismissal. The absence of felt symptoms does not mean your blood sugar is behaving well. Elevated blood sugar does not reliably produce noticeable symptoms until it becomes quite severe or has been sustained over a long period. Many people with post-meal blood sugar spikes that would register as concerning on a continuous glucose monitor feel completely normal in the moment. The damage from glycemic variability accumulates silently over years, in small blood vessel walls, in nerve endings, in kidney filtration tissue, long before it announces itself through symptoms you can feel. On the other hand, if your blood sugar genuinely is well managed and your monitoring shows no significant disruption from coffee, the absence of a problem is real and meaningful good news. You may simply be a person for whom coffee works well. That is a valid and legitimate outcome. The point is not to manufacture anxiety about a pleasurable daily ritual. The point is that feeling fine is not the same as being fine when it comes to blood sugar, and that monitoring, not sensation, is the appropriate measure. The honest verdict: coffee is not simply good or bad for diabetes. It is, like most things in nutritional science, a deeply contextual substance whose effects depend on which compound you are looking at, how the coffee was prepared, when you drink it, your genetic makeup, what else you have eaten, and the current state of your metabolic health. The broad strokes of the evidence point in this direction. Habitual, modest, predominantly black coffee consumption is associated with a meaningfully lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes, likely driven by chlorogenic acids, magnesium, and other non-caffeine compounds. For people who already have diabetes, the caffeine component can genuinely impair short-term blood sugar control, particularly on an empty stomach, at high doses, or in people who are genetically slow to metabolize it. The practical takeaway is this. The coffee is probably not your enemy, but the way most people drink it might be. The sugar, the timing, the dark roast, the 3 cups before breakfast, the flavored syrups, the oat milk with added sugar. Those are the variables worth examining honestly. The black coffee itself, especially a quality light roast or a well-made decaf, is worth retaining and possibly even celebrating. Your morning cup has been with you through a lot. It does not have to be a source of guilt. It just deserves to be understood. This article is for educational purposes and does not constitute medical advice. If you have diabetes or pre-diabetes, please work with a qualified healthcare provider or registered dietitian before making changes to how you manage your condition.